The achievements of humanity are great, are they not? The achievements of humanity are great. They are great. What are some of the achievements of humanity that you can think about? What about one of the younger ones? What are some of the achievements of humanity that you can think about and that come to mind for you? What are some of the achievements of humanity? Come on, let's have some feedback from one of the younger ones who are here today. A lot of our youth are away on Easter camp, but there are a few remaining here this morning. So, Miko. Technology. Great answer. I was thinking of that one as well. Technology is a great achievement of humanity. Isn't it great to be able to utilize technology the way we do? A wonderful achievement of humanity. How about someone else? What's another achievement? What's that? Sport. Amen to that. Sport. Don't we love sport? Hey, don't we love a good game of footy? Or for me, it's surfing. And sport is, well, it's a gift from God. I don't know about achievement of humanity, but it's great anyway, and a good answer. What's about another achievement of humanity? Anyone else? You've had a turn already, Miko. What about these three here? Come on. Putting man on the moon. That was pretty good. Wasn't it? Yep. Apart from the bunch we stranded in space for 90 days the other day, we'll forget about that one. But it was good that we got them back eventually. Absolutely. That is pretty good, isn't it? It's pretty amazing. Achievements of humanity are amazing. Any others? Last one from anybody else. What's the achievement that stands out for you that's just so great for you that you really celebrate? Anyone else? Organ transplant, isn't that cool? Organ transplant. Amen to that. That's great. I remember when being a young man and Chris Barnard transplanted the first heart transplant. Do you remember that? You remember that? Yeah, ripped him open and put it in. I don't think he lasted all that long, but it was a great achievement, groundbreaking at the time. And hasn't it gone on to be a great achievement of humanity? Medicine, space exploration, the internet, these are great achievements of humanity, isn't it? And they're commendable. But isn't it funny, in the midst of all these great achievements, that we still can't find a cure for the common cold? Cancer eludes us, and, raising the dead to life, well, it's just a pipe dream of cryogenics, isn't it? Cryogenics, where we want to freeze people and the hope that sometime in the future we can have the technology and the achievement of humanity to bring them back to life again. And so raising the dead to life is really just a pipe dream of cryogenics. But we celebrate the human achievements that God allows us to achieve. But Easter celebrates the achievements of God. Celebrates the achievements of God in raising Jesus Christ from the dead, something that humanity has not been able to do. At best, we can freeze humans with the hope of having the technology to bring them to life in the future. But the achievements of God that we celebrate at Easter are raising Jesus from the dead. Raising Jesus from the dead. And it's seen and recorded by many, or it was seen by many, but recorded by a guy called John in particular in the passage that was read. He wrote a whole book about it. He wrote a whole book about it. And in John, the passage that was read to us, John chapter 20, I'd encourage you to have it open before you and on your device or in the Bible from the back or wherever. Have it open. You'll notice what he says at the end of chapter 20. The end of chapter 20. Do you see it? There at the end of chapter 20, Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Life in his name. I wonder, how is your life? How is your life at present? How is your life at the moment? In the midst of the present? In the face of the future? How is your life? Take a moment just to think about that. How is your life in the midst of the present and in the face of the future? How is your life? That's something even the youngest of us here this morning can think about. That's a question for you. You may be living, but do you have life? Do you have life? But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and by believing you may have life in His name. In John, and in his book, and particularly in chapter 20, John wants us to know that in His resurrection, Jesus alone is the Lord of all life. And He alone gives life. That's the big idea I want to suggest to you today for that passage that was read to us, John 21 to 31, that Jesus alone is the Lord of all life and that He is the giver of life. He alone gives life. That'll pop up there for you on the data projector, something you can chew on and gather your thoughts around as we unpack this text, the central theme, the key idea, and He supports this claim with evidence. Notice the evidence with me in John chapter 20. Notice the evidence with me in John chapter 20 to support this claim. Well, there were unexpected responses to Jesus Christ, unexpected responses to His resurrection. Have a look at those as we walk our way through this passage. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciples, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put Him." Do you see how the resurrection of Jesus Christ was unexpected, particularly to Mary? Mary thinks they've stolen the body in verse 9. They still did not understand from the scriptures that Jesus had to rise from the dead. And so there were unexpected responses from those who hadn't quite realized that Jesus alone is the Lord of all life and alone gives life. Mary's in the garden a little later on in verse 13, and two angels are in the tomb, and someone speaks to her in verse 13. Have a look at it there. The two angels ask her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken the Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put Him." Do you see? Unexpected. At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. She wasn't expecting to see Him risen from the dead, but He was. And then there's doubting Thomas. Doubting Thomas in verse 25. So the other disciples told Him, "We've seen the Lord." But He said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in His hands and put my fingers where the nails were and put my hands in His side, I will not believe." They weren't expecting Him to have risen from the dead. But having seen the unexpected, they are convinced. And John records this as evidence for the resurrection that was unexpected, but is also recorded. And look at the details of what we see in this chapter regarding the resurrection. Verses 3 to 8. So Peter and the other disciples started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciples outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter, who was behind him, arrived and went into the tomb, and he saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the burial clothes that had been around his head. The clothes were folded up by itself, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciples who had reached the tomb first also went inside. They still did not understand from the scriptures that he had to rise from the dead. Do you see, these are eyewitness accounts? Eyewitness accounts to the resurrection. The details are so specific that they cannot be anything other than eyewitness accounts. They tell us exactly what happened. And it's too accurate to be invented by a bunch of first century Galilean fishermen. Unexpected, recorded, but while they were unexpected, they were predicted. They were predicted. Have a look at verse 9. It was not only Jesus who predicted his resurrection, but the teachings of the entire Bible. Verse 9. They still didn't understand from the scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. And in Luke, one of my favorite parts in the Bible, chapter 24, at the end of Luke's recording, verses 25 to 26, two men are walking along the road and they're talking about what's happened in Jerusalem, and Jesus comes alongside them and he says, "Hey, tell me what's going on. Why are you so sad?" And they say, "Well, the guy that we thought was the Messiah has been crucified and dead." And do you know what he says to them in verse 25? "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. Moses and all the prophets, the whole Bible, particularly the Old Testament, had predicted the events that unfolded in Jerusalem over Passover and the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Years before the arrival of Jesus, it was announced that God's King would walk the earth. And that's why a couple of Sundays ago we saw on Palm Sunday that they threw down palms and said to Jesus, "Save us, Messiah, God's long-expected King." But he was a king who would not ride in on a horse to conquer, but a king who rode in on a donkey to serve. To live the life that we could not, to die the death we deserved, and to rise to new life that he offers to all who will trust him. Predicted events, recorded details, unexpected responses, and physical evidence. Look at verse 20. It's not just a spiritual experience or hallucination, as some often try to describe away the resurrection as. Verse 20, John wants to know. No, it's physical. After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side, and the disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. You see, it's physical. What about verse 25? So the other disciples told him, "We've seen the Lord." What about verse 27? Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and reach out and put your hand into my side, and stop doubting and believe." Do you see, Jesus was physically alive, risen from the dead. The evidence was physical. He's not a ghost, as some people suggest. Luke's gospel has him eating fish. And ghosts, they don't do that. Not that I know of anyway. Hallucinations don't take place on repeated occasions with multiple witnesses, as Jesus appeared on multiple occasions before multiple witnesses. And the physical evidence for his resurrection is conclusive and indisputable. And the logical conclusion is that the missing body explains the resurrection. There's an empty tomb. It's recorded not only by those sympathetic to Jesus, but by his executioners, by Roman historians, independent of Christianity. And the incredible thing is, if the Romans wanted to get rid of Christianity, all they had to do was produce the body of Jesus Christ, but they couldn't, because Jesus Christ was risen. Neither Jew nor Roman could produce the body. 500 witnesses saw Jesus Christ at various occasions and in numerous ways. And they were prepared to die for what they had seen. You see, people don't die for hallucinations. The logical conclusion is that the reliable testimony is true. That's the logical conclusion. And then lastly, look with me at the credible testimony, the last piece of evidence that we can draw from this text. There may be more, but just so much for today, the credible testimony. Even then, there were skeptics who didn't believe, maybe like you here today. You've come along for whatever reason, but you're a bit skeptical about this Christianity thing and above all about Jesus and his resurrection. But they saw the fact and they were persuaded. And Thomas is the key skeptic. Have a look at verse 25. Unless I see the nail marks in his hand and put my fingers where the nails were and put my hands in his side, I will not believe. Yet 8 days later, as we will explore in a minute, he says, my Lord and my God. My Lord and my God. Sorry, in verse 28. Verse 28. You see, Jesus really was dead. The experts checked his body. They were no fools at this. They thrust the sword into his side as blood flowed out and water flowed out. It showed that he was medically dead. But on the third day, he rose victorious from the grave. A story that many of you know familiar and are well aware of. Having defeated death, carried God's judgment for our rebellion upon himself to the cross. Taking God's wrath upon himself so that we don't have to, as the Passover lamb who takes away the sins of the world, as we saw on Friday, and demonstrating that he had conquered death and all God's enemies, achieving that which we could not. And so what are the implications for us as we consider this evidence? What are the implications? Well, just two. You could probably draw a whole lot more from it for yourself, but I want to suggest there are just two as we look at two different responses, secondly and in conclusion. The first implication that we draw from Thomas's confession is that Jesus is the Lord of life. Jesus is the Lord of life. Jesus alone is the Lord of life. Have a look at Thomas's reaction to the evidence in verse 28. Thomas said, my Lord and my God. My Lord and my God. Have a think about that. My Lord and my God. At the sight of Jesus and the evidence presented to him, all doubt is vanished. And Thomas declares, my Lord and my God. Now, can anyone tell me why that's remarkable? Can anyone tell me why that's remarkable? Let's open it up to the floor. My Lord and my God. Anyone under 15, why is that so remarkable that he should say that? What do you reckon, Caitlin? No? Don't know? Anyone else? You're not under 15, Robin. As much as you would hope you are, you're not quite there. You just missed the cutoff. We'll get to you in a sec. Anyone under 15? Why is it so remarkable that Thomas, when seeing Jesus, says, my Lord and my God? Anyone under 15? No? Okay. 20? 25? Anyone? Robin, tell us.
He recognized that he wasn't just his Lord, he was actually God.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well done. Absolutely. My Lord and my God. You see, Robin's hit the nail on the head. It's astounding. Some may have called Jesus Lord, but to call Jesus God, well, that was blasphemy, wasn't it? And it was not what Jewish people did. To call another human God was blasphemy. You see, Thomas realized that before him stood no ordinary man. A mere man could not rise from the dead. The evidence was overwhelming. And Thomas realizes that before him stands God's long-awaited everlasting King, the Lord of life, appointed to judge all humanity. Do you see, his resurrection tells us that every person who has ever lived will one day stand before the resurrected King Jesus, the Lord of all life. For as surely as he has risen from the dead, he will return to judge the living and the dead. You see, the resurrection of Jesus is a picture of the future. And I wonder how that makes you feel in the present. How does it make you feel in the present? Maybe it's a bit unsettling in the present to think that that is the future that awaits. But perhaps you're a bit like my mother. You're a bit like my mother, Eileen. One of my abiding memories of my mum was her singing this song. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know what? He holds the future. Do you see, his resurrection means he is the Lord of life, and life is worth the living just because he lives. Do you see, in the midst of present uncertainties, the risen and returning Jesus Christ offers us peace. He is the Lord of all life. He's in control. He's risen. He's reigning. He's ruling. He's resurrected. And he's in control. And he holds the future. And life is worth the living because he lives. And so I want to suggest that we can have peace in the face of present uncertainties because Jesus is the Lord of life. Peace in present uncertainties and in the world in which we live. Isn't that great? For Jesus alone is the Lord of life. The evidence is beyond dispute, and He alone gives life. And so have a look as we finish at verse 17 at another reaction to the evidence. The first came from Thomas. The second is going back a little bit to Mary, who also encounters the risen Jesus Christ. Have a look at verse 17. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet returned to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am returning to the Father and your Father, to my God and to your God." To my God and to your God. In his divinity, he stood before Thomas, but in his humanity, he stands before Mary and says, I am going to my God and your God. The God of all the universe can become your God and my God. You see, Christianity is not about rules, it's not about regulations, it's not about rituals, it's not about repetition, it's not about religion and rigmarole. But a relationship with God who loves you and has died to pay for your rebellion and for my rebellion, and has risen to pay for our sins so that we can live as He intended and for which we were created. With Him as our Father and as our God. I wonder, how does that make you feel? To know God as your Father means that death isn't the end, but a crossing over into eternal relationship with the one who loves you enough to die for you. And it gives significance and purpose to all of life. In the face of this future. Do you see, you exist for eternity as we finish. You exist for eternity. For far more than this fleeting moment in life. And everything matters. In relationship with the one who made you and whose kingdom stands forever. We can have peace in present uncertainties and purpose in the face of the future. You see, Muhammad died in 6032 AD. Buddha died at the aged 80. Confucius died in 479 BC. Your career will die, and the materialistic dreams do not offer this life of sins forgiven and a lasting relationship with your Creator. Only the risen Jesus has defeated death. Only the risen Jesus has paid the price for our rebellion against God. Only the risen Jesus demonstrated that He is Lord of life. And only the risen Jesus can give life, peace, and purpose. Two things that elude our existence, but that He gives. Starting now in a relationship with Him and lasting into eternity. Because you know, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of His disciples which are not recorded in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in His name. And I pray that today, this Easter, like Thomas in verse 28, like Mary in verse 16, you will look to the risen Jesus and that by believing you will have life in his name, because Jesus alone is the Lord of life, and he alone gives life. The evidence is indisputable, and the implications are clear.